let's what you were just saying then was actually a good way to like sort of have an entry point at the um of the podcast. So if you could kind of just repeat something of what you just said, and that'll be a good way to segue in.
Well, I think what we were sort of doing last time was talking a bit around. Once we'd moved off the software topic, we moved into sort of a bit about what we were doing, and it seemed like the main thrust of the problems we were having were around the actual act of getting the work done. Not only getting the work done, but getting the work completed in enough time that it felt worthwhile, but also knowing when to sort of give up on things, knowing when you've learned as much as you are going to learn from a particular project and where that line sort of is and how to keep moving and not to get stuck in something and spend 2 months on it, when you've already taken away everything that you are going to take from that project.
Yeah, not only productivity as in actively doing things, but effective productivity.
Yeah, not
And
just doing things for the sake of doing it, but
yeah,
having a reason to. I was
well, I
thinking,
think I think we'll. With that said, this is probably a good place to open the podcast. So,
yeah,
hello everybody. My name is Jayden. I am blah, and this is also Kris.
why are you blah?
Um, because I didn't think of what to say.
Oh,
So
okay.
I am blah.
Well, well, I'm Kris, and I am terminally unable to get a project finished.
Well,
Just thought I'd
you and
lead
I are
us in there.
like. So, Kris, you have thoughts on productivity. What are they?
Well, my thoughts on productivity are helpfully arranged in the amount of notes that I've taken here on our conversation that we just had about productivity.
Ah, yes, that is a very interesting point. Well,
I was wondering if you
I'll,
just wanted to lead off because last week we did say that we were going to talk a bit about productivity, and I think leading on from talking about the projects that we were working on and the struggles that we were having with them,
yeah,
those projects seem to be sort of revolving around what constitutes productivity, and like we were just saying, what constitutes effective productivity versus just putting stuff out for the sake of putting stuff out or finishing stuff for the sake of finishing stuff, and where that line is and what could actually be useful.
yeah. Well, I think there's definitely certain methods of productivity that are more effective than others, and that's something that's pretty obvious without saying. Something I've been playing around with a bit are ways to stop myself from just burning out. Like burnout is just such a killer. And I think controversial statement here. I think it's important for everyone to experience burnout once
Ooh,
because
hot take.
hot take, but here's my justification. Not everyone's going to agree. That's fine, but I just think that if you burn out, if you can bounce back from that, you know where your limit is, and you can push that up a limit, and you know when to pull back on it. It's
Well,
not
so
something that's gonna if that's not something that's gonna help for everyone, but that's something that I think has been pretty helpful for me.
would you make a distinction between running out of energy and burnout, or running out of momentum and burnout? Because to me, burnout is a very specific thing that you encounter. And I don't know about you, but in the past for me, it's been sort of intrinsically linked to things like anxiety and depression and that sort of area where you're actually getting into a bit of an unhealthy territory because your
Maybe, yeah.
expectations are so high for the thing that you want to be doing and you are unable to do that. And then what you sort of get into, in my opinion, what burnout is you don't know what the limit is. You don't know whether you're pushing too hard or whether you're not pushing hard enough. So you don't know which direction to travel in. And that's a dangerous place to be. And it's something that I've had myself. I don't know if I'd say that people should get into that position. Is there some sort of nuance there that you would make?
I think that maybe you and I have had different experiences of burnout. I've definitely had a lot of burnout at university, but I think that the burnout that you have experienced is in a different way, whereas it's a more self-managed, whereas with mine, it was more at uni, especially doing my masters, where my burnout was more or less confined to my semesters so that I could really push myself, and by the end of the semester, I was at the edge of burning out, or I was burnt out, but nevertheless, I would still have that semester break to recuperate. So I think, possibly that's where, the difference with you and I is
Yeah,
there.
I think
I
that's
think
a
that,
there
I
might be
think,
a terminological difference there.
I think,
Terminological difference. The
I
the
think
idea
burning
being
out,
that I think what I see as burnout is a bit more severe than what you're talking about. I think maybe that could be a good subject for a podcast that we do actually on burnout.
mm,
So show me your segue magic and bring it back around to productivity, and tell me how you relate the idea of knowing your upper and lower limits in figuring out how to apply that to a project.
well, here is some segue magic right here as I
Segue
stall
man.
for time to think. I have pushed myself pretty hard at uni, and I've gotten to points where I just feel like I'm about to bust. And at the time, it was just at the time thinking at it, I was just like, why am I doing this to myself? This is so pointless in causing this much stress on myself. And in a way, it was definitely bad for me. There is a bit of toxic culture to that at the university that I was at.
Mm.
But what that has taught me was what my limits are, and how hard I can push that. And so with that knowledge, I've sort of been trying to figure out ways that I can be more productive in my days. Because when I was at university, I would just sit there, usually for the same working on the same project for days on end. And the worst parts where I really felt like I was just killing myself was when I was just not looking at other subjects. I was delaying, an essay while I was working on a design studio for something. And what I've what I wasn't doing is I wasn't making incremental progress. I wasn't bringing everything up to boil at the same time, so to speak.
Practicing starting more than practicing finishing.
Yeah, yeah, somewhat. Things were just unbalanced, and I was just too set and focusing on the one thing. And we touched on this a little bit in the last pod, where I feel like if I work on the same project for too long, you're more likely to get sick of it. You, like the human brain just is not meant to concentrate on the one thing for so long because it just
Right.
bits the dummy. Well, at least that's
Well,
my.
it starts to create a trauma around it that's like, I want to go sit down in that same space and work on that same thing because I value the outcome of it. But then your body has a physical reaction that's like, no, 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 you don't want to do that. What we want to do is go play video games and eat greasy food.
Yeah, and so I think it's really important to be able to have something that is separate to that,
Hmm.
in the sense that it is scheduled and it is programmed into you to have something else to be productive in on the
See,
side of what you're actually doing.
I know that as effective procrastination. Do you know what that is?
No, but it sounds quite a bit like what I'm doing. Not quite effective procrastination. Mine more of comes around from indecisiveness of things that I want to do. So, as I've touched in the other pods, I want to have a business in ArcViz, architectural rendering, but I also want to be a stylized environment artist or prop
Hmm.
artist. And at this point, I've decided, okay, I really want to just push uh, doing stylized art quite hard. I really want to make some good progress because I've been telling myself for years that I'm going to develop that skill further. But at the same time, I'm not ready to give up on ArcViz. I do have some potential there, and I've got some clients, willing to go ahead with some projects. So in the meantime of not having any clients, what I've decided to do to continue to sharpen my skills in Archiviers and keep my portfolio up to date and to help myself find new clients is I've dedicated myself every day at about the same time. So about 8 o'clock, I'll go to a cafe, pull out my laptop. I'm that guy, and I'll do an hour of ArcViz, and then I'll go home and I'll have breakfast, brush my teeth, whatever, and then I'll spend the rest of my day um, working on game art, working on
Hmm.
stylized art, and the great thing about that is that it gives me this sense of once I've done that, the whole day is just a little bit of pressure is taken off because I feel like I haven't completely neglected this other thing, which is a problem that I had at uni where if I was working on designing a building for an assignment and then I had these essays that I was just neglecting these other things that I had to do that I wanted to do, but I was just completely neglecting. I wasn't making any incremental progress, which I think is probably a key word here.
Yeah.
It felt like I was just it feels like I'm just pushing that boulder just a little bit, enough to sort of make a difference and feel like I've done something productive. And I think it's really important to, get something productive done early in the morning
Hmm.
because it gives you a sense of accomplishment early on. And,
Yeah. Here.
maybe that is something that it can make you a little bit complacent. I don't actually know, but something from
That's what I'm about to ask, because I'm saying I agree with you, but as a devil's advocate, I would like you to justify the difference between scratching an itch so that you can go the rest of your day without feeling the pressure to do it and actual productivity. Because how do you make the differentiation between not taking the thing you'd like to be working on seriously enough to put the hours in without having justified it to yourself? Because I'm not saying that this is happening, but an uncharitable take would be that you don't believe in your goal of hand painted CG art enough to feel like you've achieved something by working on that alone, and that by having to do that hour in the morning of ArcViz, you've done your big boy work, you've done your adult work, and then that gives you the justification to play the rest of the day. So, what would you say to that? I'm not saying that that's how I feel
yeah.
about it. I'm just saying that it could be a critique of that particular argument.
Well, it goes back to my previous experience doing this. So what I and the reason why I started doing this is that a couple of years ago I went in back to working in architecture and the days were just so long and so grindy no matter what part of a project I was working on, even if it was something that I actually really enjoyed. Just getting through the day really was just it was a bit difficult. And at some point I thought I want to make some progress towards this goal. I want to make some progress towards working towards ArcViz. So I'd get this work that I was at, it had a cafe across the road, the same cafe that I go to now, and I would show up there an hour before I start work, and I do an hour. And this is actually a term that my friend used to do the same thing, and he called it an hour. And so I do an hour of work of ArcViz, and then I'd go into work, and just I didn't realize this at first, but my days were just so much better. It was so much easier to get through the work. And
Hmm.
I really noticed it so much significantly when if I woke up late and I didn't have time to go and do that hour of 3D art before I started my actual job. And I think this is just pure skepticism, not a scientist, not a doctor here, but I think that getting something accomplished early on in the day must release some sort of neurochemical like serotonin or something like that, and that's just a good way to perk you up in the morning for the rest of your day. And
It's quick wins, right? It's
it's
it's it's
it's
not
this
about justifying the work later in the day. It's about having completed something, so you've given yourself the space to explore the rest of the day.
Yeah,
So you feel
it's
like
the way I would.
you're not chasing to catch up with the pack. You are at the head of the pack comfortably, which gives you the space to sort of focus on things that might be less immediately satisfying.
Yeah, what the way I would describe it is it gets the ball rolling in a really great way. And it's sort of related to this military thing that they do where some of the viewers might have seen it online. There's this, I think it might have been a TED talk or a speech by a military official. I can't remember if they're Australian or American, and they were explaining why they make their soldiers make their beds perfectly every single morning. And it's because, first of all, the first thing you do when you wake up is make your bed. You've done something productive. And not only have you made your bed, but you've made it perfectly. It's that satisfaction of starting the day well. And then, no matter how bad your day goes, at least you have a nicely made bed to climb back into. And it kind of runs somewhat along those lines of starting the day properly. You start,
So is that about bracketing the day itself, or is it just about the starting?
uh, for me, it's just about the starting. It's starting the day on a positive note because there's nothing worse than like starting the day poorly where you wake up late or whatever and then you kind of just scroll on social media for a while in bed and then
Mm.
you go to the toilet and kind of just go, I'm tired, and then you slowly have breakfast. But no, if you pull yourself out of bed, you do your morning routine that you have to do really quickly, and you get some work done, then you've kind of gotten something under your belt. And I think this is just me theorizing here, but I think maybe that has something to do with possibly releasing some sort of dopamine or whatever, and that kind of gets you in a good mood and a good rhythm for the rest of the day. It gets you in a productive mindset because honestly, that's what it does for me. It gets me in a
Mm.
productive mindset.
Well, yeah, it at least gets rid of white page syndrome, where the scope of the work is as vast as you can imagine because you haven't broken it down into the smaller tasks yet. And that's Have you read a book called Eat That Frog?
I have not, but I've heard of it. I've heard of the term.
So the main thrust of it is that you're supposed to just do the hard thing that you're dreading first instead of just
Yes.
wombling around doing whatever you want. You just do the hard thing first, you get it out of the way, and then you focus on all the little other bits that you would have probably preferenced.
Yes, actually that is exactly it because Archviz
Because
is
my just as an addition to that, my question to you would be: are you eating a frog in that you foresee something challenging or unpleasant that you need to get out of the way, or are you doing something that drags you out of bed because it's something you want to do and you take pleasure in? Because I think there is a subtle but a meaningful difference between the two.
this sounds counterintuitive, but both. Both in a sense that I enjoy ArcViz and doing that and moving that boulder forwards makes me feel like, yes, I'm on the path to being a freelancer and I'm producing a body of work that I will be happy with. But with
Mm.
that said, I definitely, for me, I love stylized hand painted art much more than ArcViz. If I had to pick one, sorry, ArcViz, it's gonna have to be stylized art. But
And so
here's
why don't you leap out of bed with the incentive of getting up, of doing an hour of hand painted instead of architecture? What's the justification?
because I've tried previously to wake up and do stylized art for the first half of the day and then do some archviz later. And I've tried that vice versa. I've found that if I just get some archviz done in the morning, then I'm free to do game art for the rest of the day.
So it
It,
is a
it pulls me
permission
out.
thing.
Yeah, it pulls me out of bed in a sense that time to go and get myself towards a lifestyle and a business that I really want to do. But it also, once I've done that, I'm free to do the art that I prefer. It's not that I don't like doing ArcViz, it's that there are other modes of art that I like better.
It's about not letting the thing that you want to do consume your entire life as a 9 to 5
Yeah,
day job might otherwise do. It's about accepting that you're a dimensional person outside of that, and that if you're making incremental progress, that incremental progress is and can be enough. Sometimes it won't be, sometimes you'll have to put more
mm,
hours
mm.
in, but
Yeah,
it's accepting that once you've done it, you've at least moved the boulder a little bit.
yeah, exactly. And like you just said, sometimes it can require you to put a bit more effort in. And I think that if you are in a situation where you think, oh, this this thing requires more effort, at least the boulder's already moving. At least you haven't just sat there procrastinating it for 2 weeks or a month or a week or however long. At
Mm.
least you have actually made some decent progress. At least it's moving. You don't have to start from zero.
And is that productivity to you? Is that what productivity looks like or is defined by?
No, I think there's a lot of different uh, types of productivity. I think that there's more, as I said, there's more effective ways of productivity than others. And I think it's a fairly effective productivity, for me at least, to rather than solve my indecisiveness and make a decision, it allows me to do two things at once. It allows me to be a bit more flexible, a bit
Yeah.
more general in my art approach, and yeah, overall, it just feels like it's just a good form of productivity for me. And I think that it there is a transition period in there, in that when I go and I sit down at a cafe, and you don't have to do this, like maybe you can do it right, say you want to sit down at your computer at home, whatever. Once I do that, before I start doing the ArcViz, I write a list of the things I want to do today. I've got a little booklet that's roughly pocket size, and I just have like just to do things on the day, and
Yeah.
at the top it'll be ArcViz an hour, and then
I have to admit that lists for me have been the highest leverage thing for productivity. It's breaking it down to the actual simplest next step. I don't know if I'd do something like ArcViz 1 hour because to me that would be a little bit too general. I think it'd be like, go to cafe, set up laptop, open project file. Like it has to be that granular because if it's not, then you're applying thought to the process. And as soon as you start applying thought, you're applying choice. And when choice happens, you start making decisions against your own interest in the moment. Would you agree to that?
yes, but I think it's something that really depends on the individual. I've tried to be really granular before with my lists, and it just doesn't work as well for me. I'm going to go back and I'm try it a little bit more, but I'm just trying out how being more broad with things will be, because I
Mm.
find that if I'm going too granular, it's one of those things where I find it works on paper, but then when I'm in the moment and I'm doing things, I'm like, I could really push this a little bit further. Like,
And then you don't
maybe I don't have
respect.
to. So, for me, what I find is I'll write a series of things, of tasks that I want to do. So, hang on, let me open it up now and see some of the things that I have.
See, I think that when you do that, I think it, as you say, it is down to the individual because I do need the specificity. I need to have a moment at the start where I sit down and me and my wife had this saying, and we have to remind each other of it constantly because we're both very procrastinating people. Um, no time spent planning is time wasted because if you
yeah,
actually set aside a specific time for planning before you begin a process or a project, you've sort of accounted for the entire process before you started. So you always know what your next step is.
mm,
And if you know what your next step is, you've removed the need to actually really think about it unless you encounter an unforeseen obstacle, at which point you can sort of re engage your executive function and be a bit more critical about it. But just
It
for
automates
general,
things in your brain.
yeah, it allows you
Uh,
to remove the choice that you need to make constantly in art, because art's already about choices. It's about momentary, what's better, this or that, or what can I do, this or that. And if on top of that you're trying to like ask why, and you're trying to question, and you're trying to sort of interpret the most productive process while you're in the process, I guess what it comes down to is something that I always heard from Pixar artists. I couldn't quote you a specific place because it was years ago that I was investigating all this stuff, but they always said trust the process.
mm,
Put the process in place, trust the process, do the process, and then if you get to the other end and something was like higher leverage, and if something was harder than it needed to be, then once you've completed one iteration of the thing, you go back and you fix the thing. You don't try and build the train track as you're riding the train.
yes, I think this kind of leads into something else that I wanted to talk about, which was routine and automating things in your brain. And
Yeah,
so
habit.
habit. I've read a little bit in psychology, not not too deep at all, mostly just in things that are relevant for me in being productive.
Yeah.
And that we need routine as humans. If we don't have routine, we just become these
Sedentary,
we just
sugar consuming blobs.
yeah, we just become like a shell of something that, we could be or something like that. When you have, say, like when you've got a child and if you have them in a routine, they wake up at this time, they eat at these times, and they go to bed at these times, and all that sort of stuff. They are much easier to manage. If you don't have a child in a routine,
Oh,
they're
100%.
just an absolute little devil.
One,
And
one of my previous jobs was being an education assistant for disabled children in school, and especially autistic brains and people on the spectrum and people with ADHD and all these behavioral systems. These are just sort of like a deficiency or an amplification of traits that everybody has anyway. That's why they call it a spectrum, because everybody's on it. It just depends on which end you're on or whether you're more in the middle.
mm,
The thing that I've always noticed is that anything that applies to people who are at a bit of a disadvantage or an advantage, however you choose to describe it, in that way, it applies to regular people as well. And that structure that you're talking about, every time, if you get them on a repetitive schedule, it's never going to be so repetitive because of life, because of the chaos theory and the universe around us, that it becomes unmanageable. You're not creating a Groundhog Day for yourself or other people. You're just giving yourself a framework to live by.
mm. Yeah, what it does is it automates things in your brain. It's the things in your day that are most likely going to happen tomorrow and the day after and the day after and the day after. And so if you can do those things in the same way at the same time, it is almost like a circadian rhythm where your brain just kind of knows when to wake up. In a similar way
And
with
you
a
feel it,
routine,
you get drawn towards it.
yeah, where as in if you've got a routine where you've got to do a particular thing at a particular time in a particular way or something like that, something that's habitual.
Mm.
It's something that automates it, and everybody has a mental bandwidth. There's only so much that your brain can process in a day, and
Yeah.
by freeing that up, in having by not having to think about, oh shit, I got off, oh, what am I going to do for dinner? Or if you've got something sorted, if you know what to do for dinner, if you have dinner at a certain time, uh, or you've got a certain time to go buy your dinners, or you have a certain time that you pre-cook or whatever, then that takes a lot of that stress away from you. It's already done. It's already automated, which is something very hypocritical that I should be taking advice from. Uh,
do as I say, not as I do.
do as I say, not as I do. You heard that.
Yeah.
And
Oh, look, if it's all right, could I put an asterisk on that? Because I think asterisk on that, because I think the power of habit aside from productivity could be a really good discussion that we could dive into, because it's something I've done quite a bit of looking into myself, and I think that could be a topic for another day, outside of necessarily the confines of talking about productivity.
Yeah.
Because there's also this book that I'm in the middle of, which I'd love to finish by the time we actually got around to that, which is Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Hmm.
And it has some pretty interesting stuff to say about this. And I'd love to have that and bring that into the podcast if at all possible. What I was thinking, to sort of circle back around to applied productivity in that way, are there any actual physical tools or apps or just anything you use? Because, like, for instance, as a tool, you use the act and the habit of going to the cafe and plugging in your laptop and setting that up. Like, that's a ritual, right? Do you have any other rituals or tools or aids that you use to help sort of streamline that productivity, to remove the choice?
A notebook, honestly. I think some of the best, and reading. I think two of the things that I've found personally the most useful, the things that I need to really start implementing again, but previously when I found what I found the most powerful is writing and reading. You don't specifically have to write about things that you are reading, but I found that when I was at uni, just coming home and reading for half an hour was a really good way to reset my brain,
Transition.
to transition. And that's less relevant to like the whole productivity thing, but it's sort of relevant in that it was a good way to defragment my brain so that I'd be fresher for the next day and
Bring focus back.
bring focus back. And another point was when I was regularly writing, every day I'd sort of do a bit of work and then write, or whenever I would write in the day, and writing just word vomiting, kind of like what we're doing in this podcast.
Stream
When
of consciousness.
just stream of consciousness on the page, formalizing. Oh, sorry, excuse me. Formalizing your thoughts, I think, is just a really great way to help you rationalize things that you're thinking about. And you can, I mean, even if you just talk about, you open a sentence with, I like pizza, and also,
And then
uh,
keep writing from there.
yeah, yeah. And then, like, sooner or later, and it's usually sooner, where your brain just kind of goes click, and it's onto a topic that's actually on your mind. Maybe
It's
not something that's not really verbal, like not something that you really was aware that you were wanting to think about, but something that was there nagging you. All of a sudden, like instead of it just passing through your mind, it catches. It catches on
mm.
the page, and you're not going to really move past that as easily as you would. You're not going to get distracted as easily as you would in your own mind, and it kind of quiets that echo
it,
in your head a little
it
bit.
makes it linear, because like your brain can open 9 tabs and one of them's playing music and you can't find it, like,
Yes,
whereas if you're writing stream of consciousness, it forces all of your brain to work on that linear sentence.
totally. And so what that does for me in terms of productivity is that if I have a problem, you know, say I'm doing like game art or whatever, and I have a problem that I can't solve. Say it's like, I don't know, my UVs, or I can't figure out how to paint this certain thing. First of all, just taking a break and walking away every so often is actually a good thing, but also taking a break to do some writing in
Mm.
in that time, you can actually there might actually be a solution there in your head, but you can't really you can't really focus on that
You have to
as
take the
well.
pressure off it before you can change it.
Yeah, so you kind of you step away from it, which is the first good thing to do once you get really stuck on something. But then
I
writing
love
about it,
long walks, man. I gotta say that
me
the
too.
highest leverage I get is a long walk, because once you finish thinking about, your tax return and the last stupid thing you said, um, you get through all of that stuff, and then eventually your brain just sort of starts hitting all the topics in sequence, and it just goes this one, this one, this one, and then your brain goes, "Hey, did you realize that this thing was connected to that thing?" And you go, "I did not." And
Did
now I
you
do.
have you heard of Martin Heidegger?
No. Oh, maybe. What's he done?
He was a German philosopher in the early 20th century, and so he wrote a lot about walking and thinking, and how those two are just absolutely connected. Like if you want to think, you walk, and that's how he would
Mark.
really think about. That's how he would really write a lot of the topics of his books. Is that he would he'd more or less just write them in his head, and like a lot of his philosophical theories would be solved just through walking. You know, going through hikes in forests or the countryside, or even just around cities.
And I think it's just allowing your brain the space to think about something less linearly. Because while you're writing, it's turning your brain into a linear stream, which helps you focus. But
Mm.
when you're walking, you're opening up all those tabs again and you're letting the music play and you
It's
make
almost like
connections
meditation.
that are a bit, yeah, it's a more arbitrary way of interpreting the information. It's less programmatic and more creative.
It basically just lets your brain scream it all out. Like your brain kind of just like you go on a walk, you let your brain scream everything out that it's done. You get back from it, it's like, you right? You done? You
Yeah,
good? All right. And then you sit
yeah,
down and you look at your work
and
and you go, hey, so that's what was missing.
you
I
have that
think,
quietness. Like I was just gonna say that, like I also find a really good way of keeping focused once you're in that place. Once you've either done your stream of consciousness writing or you've gone for a big long walk, long showers as well, they can help.
oh,
But they do use
I
a lot
love
of
a
water,
shower.
so
Yes,
the
yes, I do not have long showers to think. Yes, that is, yes, I'm a ecological.
I'm gonna leave this long pause in. By the way,
I hate you.
the the problem I was the other thing I was going to talk about was that once you're actually in that moment, you have to preserve that moment. You need to figure out ways not only that you won't be distracted, but that you can expect not to be distracted.
Mm,
And that's where communication really comes in, especially if you live with other people. Because I found that when living with other people, I really need to tell them during these hours or for the next little while, I'm going to be focused and working. And like, this might just be me because I tend to be very sensitive to like sounds and changes in my environment, but I need silence to work properly. And usually I get that by just sticking some headphones on or whatever. But you do need to make sure that everybody around you knows you're trying to focus because the smallest thing can derail you. And then, it's sort of like
totally.
you're trying to blow up one balloon, but then there's this other little balloon that's taking some of that pressure, and slowly it transitions so that more of that pressure is going into the second balloon, and all of a sudden you're thinking about, the light buzzing or that tap dripping or somebody's trying to get your attention, and then you're not thinking about the thing you're doing. And it's like that thing where you've read a sentence and you have to read it 3 more times because you didn't internalize it because your focus is split. And I think
Yeah,
it's just as important to maintain that focus as it is to gain it in the first place.
I think there definitely does come a point where you have to allow that focus to break, because it will, if you don't just snap it, it will just deteriorate.
You
You,
can get,
you know what I'm
yeah,
trying to say?
you can get tangented very
Yes,
easily, and then you're very focused on the wrong thing.
yes.
And what I use actually for that is I use a visual timer. It doesn't tick, crucially, because that would drive me insane. But it's like a egg timer that you just turn a little dial on, and it's got a red band instead of a clock face or a timer, and you can visually see at a glance. It goes for an hour or any increment there in between, but you can visually see exactly how much focus you've got left. And so what I found really handy is having a notebook open next to me while I'm working. When I think of something that's going to distract me, I write it down in the notebook so I'm not worried that it will distract me, and because it'll remind me after that period of focus, when I can go and Google that thing that I just thought of. But during that 1 hour that I set, or 30 minutes or 20 minutes, or whatever I'm working with at the time, that time, which I can see very easily and which isn't distracting me by having like a huge number on the screen, is just for that one task.
Mm.
And then if I do tangent, I will get alerted by the alarm when it goes off. If I haven't tangented, I probably need a break anyway.
Yes. I think that timers, for me personally, I think they're actually a really good tool because once I don't understand how it works in my brain, but when I set a timer to do some work, I just work better. It's just kind of like that, and this goes back to me doing an hour in the morning, is that that your time is limited, and you're going to say, oh crap, I really need to be productive. That 1 hour that I do in the morning, knowing that it's 1 hour, knowing that I'm not just going to sit here forever, uh, and I can just procrastinate, having that sort of hard line set there, drawn in the sand,
It's
makes
it's
me a bit more aware and a bit more, uh, less likely to tangent off in my brain or just be like, hey, I wonder what's happening on Reddit or that sort
but
of
then
thing.
if you even if you do, you're only doing that for however long you've got left on the clock. Like you're not doing that for the next 3 hours because you'll be alerted and you'll be like, oh, I was supposed to be working on such and such. You can just reset the timer. But at that point, you've broken that focus, like you were talking about, so that you refocus on what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, yeah, I suppose so. Like I suppose for me doing an hour, uh, and what is critically important in getting out of the house and going to a cafe is that I can't just procrastinate. I have to. I, I I can't just sit there for 3 hours or 2 hours because eventually they're going to go, get the hell out. I feel like being there for an hour at that point is a little
Well,
bit.
that's just because we both have crippling social anxiety.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, but having that pressure of having to actually leave makes me less likely to just set the clock back
Yeah,
because
you're not too comfortable.
yeah, I'm not too comfortable, and that actually is another thing that I use, another tool, which is, have you heard of Wim Hof? WIM space HOFF.
No.
So this is something I've been implementing recently, and it was shown to us by a mutual friend. Um, and he's this Scandi dude. I think he's from Finland, possibly.
Okay.
And he's been pretty famous for like 20 years. You might actually vaguely remember him from, I don't know if you remember this, Ripley's Believe It or Not, where he he got famous off being in Finland or Norway or wherever the hell he's from, and going out and swimming in glacier freezing water or hiking up this frozen mountain in like sub-zero temperatures, like -20,
Mm.
in shorts with not even a shirt on, not even a t-shirt, and he was completely comfortable for it.
Huh.
He would be in this frozen cold water like it's a spa. And when I was a kid and I first saw that, I was like, well, yep, okay, cool. That guy's just a freak of nature, right? And
Yep.
I'm sure everyone just wrote him off that way at first as well. But over the last 20 years, he has had a lot of studies done on him and conducted sort of through him, where he does have a bit of a personality cult following at this point, which is, it's kind of cool, but it's also, personality
It's like
cults.
it's one hair away from being damaging.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and so what he actually attributes this to is a breathing method. So if you want to find this online, just type in Wim Hof breathing method. And
Hmm.
so here, the general gist of it is that humans for too long have become too complacent. Like we are used we are used to just sort of sitting around and then, oh crap, there's a saber-toothed tiger, chasing me, or really having to struggle for your food. Humans have to have a bit of pressure, a bit of adrenaline pumped through them, a bit of stress, not like stress and like,
Hmm.
oh god,
Sounds
my
a bit
boss,
like
but physical stress.
variable speed running when people do that random speed running that they do where they run full out for a couple of minutes at like a sprinting speed, and then they'll like dial it back to a jog, and then they'll go straight back up to running but not quite sprinting, and they'll do that for the entire length of the course because
Yeah,
it forces your body to adjust more actively to the aerobic intake.
yeah. So I'll just sort of explain what the Wim Hof breathing method is. And it's got some other things I haven't tried, but basically you do 30 really deep breaths in, and that is kind of you breathe straight into your stomach, not literally into your stomach, but so deep that your stomach expands. A
Yeah,
full breath in.
you pull your
You
diaphragm
don't.
down.
Yep, you don't. Uh, you don't pause at all. It's this constant circular stream of breathing the whole time. It's actually kind of like hyperventilating, or it is hyperventilating, whatever. And once,
Just casually hyperventilate, you
yeah,
know.
and so on the 30th breath, on the exhale, not the inhale, but the exhale, you hold. So on the exhale, you hold it. And realistically, you hold it for as long as you bear to, but you've got to hold it for the upper levels of what's comfortable, but generally Wim Hof encourages people to hold for 60
Oh,
seconds and then
oh, yeah, no. So you're hyper oxygenating your blood by
yes,
hyperventilating,
yes.
and then you're holding your breath to burn off that additional oxygen.
Yeah, and what it actually does is not only does it burn off the oxygen, but it also burns off all of the not burn off, but it uses up all of that carbon dioxide. And I'll explain this in a bit more once I've explained how it actually works. So you do once you hold for as long as you can, or for a minute or however long, you breathe in and you hold that for 15 seconds. It's a relief breath, and then once you exhale that, you start again. So that's the first round. Then it's generally recommended that you do it 3 times, and that's how long I usually do it for. And you look really weird when you do it. My old housemate used to give me really strange looks. And I actually looked up a video of a doctor breaking down how it actually works. And so what it does is during that oxygenation phase, uh, your body builds up not only a lot of oxygen, it builds up a lot of carbon dioxide. But during that cycle, that round that you do, the the carbon dioxide rapidly falls, but the
Hmm.
oxygen stays consistent. The oxygen, continues to actually go up a little bit. So by the end of 3 rounds, your body has your blood has a lot less carbon dioxide and acidity in it through that, and but it's got a lot more oxygen in it, and it's almost like being in a forced state of meditation where I'll sit down on the couch, and so my living room is north facing. And for you folks in the northern hemisphere, the north facing is where you want to be because that's where the sun goes. If you're in the northern hemisphere, the sun will sort of shine on the southern faces of the buildings, whereas the reverse down here.
And all the toilets flush backwards. Hey, Blinky.
The more you know. Anyway, so that's a side note. But so I sit there, and the sun goes by, and I'll do these breathing methods. And as I'm doing it, I actually it makes you more aware of your body. You can feel your heartbeat a little bit more. You can hear things around you. It's like being in a state of meditation. And so when that sun sort of comes by, I can actually feel exactly what part of my body is in the sunlight because it gets like this intense tingling going through it. Not quite like pins and needles, but just this really intense kind of pleasant tingling going all through my
Hmm.
body. And then
It
once I've
does. It
done
does sound like a targeted meditation.
Yeah, and so once I finish that, the level of stress that I feel, the tension is just like, it's just, you just feel so much more relaxed. It's not like that you feel, this sort of really pleasant, orgasmic high state, but you just feel, like, you just feel normal. and you don't
Yeah.
realize that you didn't feel normal until you did it. And
I've fallen out of the habit, but I got to a very similar place actively doing. There were more basic breathing exercises, but just general meditation I do find really helps, especially when you're under a lot of pressure. Like you've got a lot going on and deadlines and stuff just feels all a bit too heavy.
mm,
It's even just taking that moment sometimes helps. And I think the breathing exercises a lot of the time, I don't doubt that there's some science behind it, but just the fact that you are focusing on your breathing and nothing else gives you this space. And I think it's the body equivalent of that space that the walk gives your brain.
mm,
And I think it all feeds into your ability to readjust and transition, because that's something we really focused on when I was working in schools, was especially younger people who don't have a lot of tools built around how they're going to change their focus and then reapply it without getting distracted. You really do. It's sort of like an essay format. You need to tell them what's going to happen and when it needs to happen, and then you need to tell them what has happened. And there needs to be this transitional period where you're going from one state to another. And a lot of the time, I think in the modern world, especially as adults, if we're not doing that sort of stuff, we sort of allow everything to feed into everything else without that breaking point. And without that breaking point brought on by breathing exercises or meditation or reading a book or going for a walk, I think that's where that head fuzziness and that noise comes from. And that's what really distracts you. And like, I don't have any of the notifications on my phone turned on for the same reason. I can't stand the level of distraction that's present in this world. And I think taking that moment, and I guess when you're doing those breathing exercises, you don't have any technology with you. You're just trying to be present with yourself in that moment, right?
well, ironically, uh, here's where the sort of cult personality thing comes in, is there's actually an app to help you do it.
Right.
And the reason why you don't have to use the app, but I personally prefer to use it, uh, because
Well, you know you're
he
doing it right for starters.
yeah. So what he does is there's like a little bit of like ambient music in the background, and he'll kind of sort of keep telling you to breathe. And what it allows me to do is, instead of counting my breaths and sort of being aware of like, now's probably a time to do my breath hold, is I just close my eyes, I just focus on my breathing. My brain doesn't really acknowledge the words that he's saying. It's kind of more automatic. It is, but on a more
Yeah.
automatic level. And then
It's a,
once
it's a
he
bit like
says,
Headspace and all those other apps where it is a guided sort of meditation,
yeah,
I guess.
and so when he says, hold, it's not like I'm hanging on to every word that he says, but when he says hold, I go, oh, okay, now. I don't have to sit there and go, one, two, three. It's
Yeah,
just,
yeah, no, I get that. I
yeah.
get that. Personally, though, I probably would try and do it on my own just because I find those moments very vulnerable and I want to be alone in that vulnerability. I don't want somebody else influencing me because I find that that is when I am most influenceable.
Mm,
And just personally, for me, I'm a lot more comfortable and a lot more able to get to that place if I know that it's born from me rather than being, influenced by somebody else. But that's just my personal feeling about it, and I understand how you'd get, feel more comfortable following the script, because then, like we talked about, was it this one or last one, where taking automating it so that you don't have to think about it so much, and especially when it's meditation, you don't want to be thinking about it too much. But just in the last few minutes that we've got of the podcast, did you want to just turn that back around and like talk it to the productivity of it? Is it just the fact that it gives you that space and allows you to be more focused, or?
yes. So I think that productivity focus are obviously very connected. It goes without saying, really. But when you are able to do things like go for a walk, you do some writing, or do your breathing meditation, whatever, it makes you a little bit more peaceful in your mind,
Mm.
and it just allows you. It's like a defragmenting on a computer or something like that, where you just work more efficiently after that. And I think
So
something
what I'm
that we
getting actually, it sounds like a lot of the productivity sort of, I don't want to call them hacks, but the productivity tools that you use, it's like they're very preemptive. You have to put yourself in that place.
yes, yeah. Well, I mean, what I don't really know many other ways that are effective for me. For me, it's
Mm.
all about, you know, taking some time to sort of stop. It's kind of like the what is it, the Pomodoro method?
The Pomodoro, yeah, where you do,
Yeah,
I think it's 20 minutes, then 5 minutes, 20 minutes, then I think it's a couple of 20-minute fives, and then you do 20-minute 10, and then you take a longer break,
yeah.
and then you.
It's for me, my productivity tools are not overloading my brain, knowing when to sort of stop and not overload my brain to use up my mental bandwidth. Because
Mm.
I read this book that was it was actually about like poverty and wealth, but it was talking about how some Indian farmers, I think they were sugar farmers or something like that. They one half of the year they'd be loaded because they just like get all their crops and they'd be selling it, and it's just like the they're living the high life. And then the other half of the year everything dries up. They're living on savings basically, and their mental bandwidth just gets consumed with just thinking about um, making it from day to day, and to the point where they actually scored lower on IQ tests or intelligence tests because of that. It's called the uh, um,
It's mental overhead, right?
yeah.
It's assigned memory.
There's an actual term for it that has escaped my the I'm staring at the book now. Why won't you give me the word?
Well,
Whatever.
if it comes to you, it's we won't go into dead air where you look it up, but the yeah, no, I totally agree with that. It's assigned brain power, which means that you can't then retarget that towards other things. And I have to admit, I'm feeling a bit of that at the moment because yeah,
Scarcity
the issue
mentality. That's it. Scarcity mentality. Sorry.
scarcity mentality.
Yeah.
Yes, very familiar with that. Because when you're in scarcity, that's the most important thing. So it's hard to preference other things above it, which means that you're running with a lowered, especially when it comes to creative work, because creative work comes beyond necessity. So if you don't have your necessity covered, it's very hard to get to a place where you're feeling actively creative, especially if your work depends on that. That can be a pretty vicious cycle. Um, yeah, there's a guy, Sean McCabe. He has a podcast called the Sean West Podcast. I think it's on hiatus at the moment, but he talks a lot about scarcity mentality in business, and that's something that really struck me about his way of doing things because he wrote a book. What was it? The overlap, the overlap technique, where he talks about not quitting his job until not quitting your job until you have a certain amount of interest or runway in your side hustle when you're transferring into something that you want to do.
That's the smart thing I should have done.
Yeah, well, that's the thing though. I don't necessarily agree with that, and I think we'll be talking about this as we go over things. But the other mental overhead is hating life, and if you don't have 6 months worth of work in you to get that 6 months runway that you need to quit your job and do something new, in my opinion, you just need to quit because you're going to figure out a way to live, especially if you live in, an advanced westernized world, especially if you live in especially if you live in a country with socialized healthcare and a bit more of a safety net.
Yeah.
I'm looking at you, America. Um,
America.
the I think the best thing to do for you is to get out of that situation as soon as possible and then see where you are, because scarcity is assuming that if you quit now you won't find something, and it's also anticipating that you won't be able to be creative or that you won't be able to find something else if it comes to that. And I think staying in a situation that's bad for you can be the worst thing that you do, especially for creative productivity,
Yeah.
because at that point you do have that scarcity mindset because you're like, but if I quit and I can't do anything, then I'm scuppered.
Yeah, I think my only real comment on that would be is that while yes, that is the ideal thing to do, you and I do have the privilege of where we were able to do that on a whim much more. And
Oh
I sort
yeah,
of
no.
have it's kind of like if you've loaded yourself up with some responsibilities where you've got kids and a mortgage and all that sort of stuff, you've already taken on that responsibility. You don't just get to walk away from it. So there are individuals where that sort of slow and easy way is the best way because
Oh,
like if you don't,
certainly.
your kids are going to starve. Well, screw the kids, but some people might not want their kids to starve.
Well, here's my response to that is that yes, I think there are places that you can put yourself in where it is a bad idea, but I would argue that it was a bad idea to get yourself into that position in the first place. It's easy to say from outside of
Controversial.
that perspective, I know, but you, okay, so for listeners of the podcast, there may or may not be a slightly socialist through line on this podcast. We apologize for that in advance, but when you are living in late stage ultra capitalism, there are definitely some no win scenarios where you've gotten yourself into a position where you just have to keep doing what you're doing. I don't think you have to put yourself into those circumstances, but I think those circumstances are definitely the ones that are both championed and lauded by society as a whole,
Mm.
which means it's easier to put yourself into that place. Outside of that, if you've not done that, then you do get a bit more wiggle room.
Yeah, and that's the sort of situation you and I were in where we were heading down that path. And I was on that road, but I was on that road where
I was on that slip and slide, man.
yeah, we were both on that slip and slide where we could have easily have just stayed on that slide. But I've, I've always been aware of where that slip and slide would take me, and I personally don't want to go down that slippery dippery. And I jumped off said slippery dippery. Uh,
And that's
and
that's as we've said before, that's sort of the instigating force behind this podcast is how to then take that choice seriously and make the best of that circumstance, because it might seem like not the cleverest idea and it might seem like it's hard to replicate, and the documentary process here is to see if that's true, because there exists a good possibility that we both end up back in exactly the same position that we were in. We're hoping not,
please
but
God
by
no.
talking about these sort of topics and getting to this sort of nitty gritty of stuff that maybe people don't necessarily think about on a daily basis, like their own productivity and where they are in their own brains and how to avoid depression and anxiety and while still producing good work, which are all topics that I think not only do we want to cover, but we'll just end up covering as an output of other things. It is taking it seriously and it's worth thinking about, I think, and sometimes hearing it said out loud and interacting with that thought more actively can be very valuable. And yeah, that's why we're covering topics like productivity and perfectionism, because it's not always about the art, and it's kind of hard to cover art in a audio medium,
Yeah, yeah,
but there's a lot more to it than that, and that's sort of the meat of where we're hoping to go.
yeah. I honestly hope that this this little experiment of ours does work out. But
And that's what it is. It's an experiment. We have no idea how well this is going to work.
yeah, yeah. Um, sorry, I just got completely distracted by something. Uh,
Thanks for being here, Jayden.
yeah, no worries, man. No worries. Now, for the rest of this podcast, I think there is one thing that we are yet to say.
And what's that?
Well, where can we find you on social media?
Oh, well, how about you go first while I have forgotten all of my social medias and will now have to check them? Actually, that's not true. Between the last podcast and this one, changed myself to @animatorkris on every social media platform: LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. So if you find animatorkris, you can find me there.
And how is Kris spelt?
KRIS.
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Jayden Socials. You can find me on Instagram at Jayden.Ray, R-A-I. You can also find me on Instagram again as JSTO_visual. And you can also find me on ArtStation as Jayden Socials. All links will be in the description. And I will condense all of my socials into something logical like Kris, but I have not done yet because I procrastinated.
Are you gonna put a link to the breathing exercise guy?
Yes, I will do that. Honestly, try it. It's
I'll give it a
awesome.
go.
Try it tonight.
I've got some of my own coping mechanisms, let's call them, that might interrupt that, but I can give it a go, see how it works.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing before we end today, I just wanted to know sort of like what you were going to be working on this week, if anything's changed, any takeaways.
Um, what I'm going to be working on is
Yeah.
being more productive. Although, well,
Ooh,
ooh,
look at that one.
well, no, well,
Nothing but
actually,
net.
well, to be honest, I've got some stuff coming up with like family birthday stuff, so that will distract me,
Yeah.
moderately to severely. But in the meantime, I am going to be continuing to do my hour in the morning. I
Hmm.
am going to be writing some more, reading a bit more, continuing my breathing, and just generally pumping out the art.
So you're going to be working on the hand painted post box? No,
Sci-fi
the
phone
phone
booth. Yeah,
booth.
sci-fi phone booth.
Sci-fi
So
phone booth.
I'm hoping to finish that off in about a week or so. So yeah,
And
I'll
where
probably
will that most likely be posted?
that will be posted on my ArtStation, Twitter, and my Instagram.
Oh, so you're gonna spam it out to the
I will
interwebs.
spam it out to the interwebs. Please, everybody, like, follow, and share, and comment, and
Cool.
all of that fun stuff.
So what do you want to talk about next week, so that the good people at home have something to look forward to?
Um,
I was thinking that maybe we could go straight into to the power of habit.
yeah,
How does
yeah.
that
I mean,
strike
let's
you?
let's go into habits. It follows on pretty well from this one. Let's just hope we don't
W-
repeat everything we spoke here.
So maybe having a gap is good. I was thinking it might be fun to talk about types of income that we're looking at, ways to have jobs without having 9 to 5s.
Hmm.
At the moment, because I'm in a sort of like a learning and portfolioing stage, I can't really talk too much about what I'm doing other than investments. But it would be nice to maybe talk about what we're intending to do and different ways of making money as artists in our position. We could probably do one on that before we hit the power of habit, just so that there's a bit of space for us to let it matriculate, and we might come back with some fresh ideas, because I would like to do that soon though, because I'm reading a book about it.
Yeah, I mean that'll give you some time to finish up your book and let it marinate in your juicy, juicy brain. So yes, next week, kiddies, we will be talking about jobs, income, and career paths, and the alternate ways that you can do those outside of the typical.
And what day are we uploading at the moment?
We are uploading on Fridays.
Fridays. So
Well, actually,
just a bit
Friday,
of how the
Friday in Australia, that is.
so that'll come out on
So
Thursday evening in the States.
yeah, so it comes out Friday in Australia, probably Thursday evening in the US.
Good show.
Yeah, honestly, the this one was a significant improvement from the previous one.
I just had to warm it up again, the old pipes.
Yeah. Um,
And we're also planning on putting up a bit more other content eventually, but we're hoping especially on YouTube.
We won't say what we'll be uploading in the future because we don't know exactly what that will be, but there will be something in the future outside of these podcasts at a point in time. Very cryptic.
That sounds a lot cagier than I was trying to make it, but yes, side eyes, extra content for all the good children.
This is just my assumption, but I think that once we get, if we get a bunch of views / listens / plays regularly every week, then that will be good for our reach.
Great. Well, you heard it here first, folks.
Yep.
If your interests are aligned with ours and you have nothing but our best interests in mind at all times, then you should definitely share, like, and subscribe.
Like, comment, subscribe. See ya!